This program, while curated to help you improve your health, contains general advice and should not replace the individual advice of your medical practitioner.
Every generation, of course, has had stress, but never before has it been so constant and so relentless.
I give the example of the pandemic. We barely did anything all year. However, we were more stressed and burnout than ever.
It's perceptions of pressure and urgency, and it's worrying about what other people think of us.
The technological age has not reduced stress, but in many ways added to our stress.
And it's that chronic stress where your body is feeling these signals of the lion or the tiger in the jungle chasing you every day.
In life, it's normal to have ups and downs. But what do we do when we get stuck? I've always been fascinated by the healing journey. Why do some people get better while others fail to make the shift? In Season 2 of The Shift, we explore the intricate world of women's health and help you discover how to balance your hormones and understand yourself better so that you can truly thrive.
The menstrual cycle is a vital sign of female well-being.
My mum just used to say, "Oh, Nan, I'm so sorry. It's part of being a woman."
I would like a call to arms for women to know that their intuition isn't lying to them.
I'm Katherine Maslen, and this is The Shift. Hello and welcome to episode 9 of The Shift. If you've been following the series along, you're halfway and I commend you for tuning in so far. If you're a human being living a normal life, then my guess is that you're going to need the information in this episode to help you address the issues that we've covered in the previous ones. While we often look at our diet, lack of exercise, or things like family history when assessing our health, stress is the one thing that gets ignored the most, but makes more impact than all of those areas combined. It's the one thing that we've learned to live with, but our bodies have not learned to live with it. There is so much to cover here, and I want to get stuck right in. Dr. Libby Weaver is a PhD and nutritional biochemist and the author of many books on issues that impact us as women, such as stress. First of all, I asked Dr. Libby what had caused the epidemic increases in health issues for women.
The constant and relentless output of stress hormones. I really think that's at the heart of so much. I guess I try to get to the heart of absolutely everything and not just label it as stress. And that was why I wrote The Invisible Load last year, was to really help people see what stress is for them as individuals. And so much of that comes down to caffeine. You know, when you go, what leads us to make adrenaline today? It's caffeine, it's perceptions of pressure and urgency, and it's worrying about what other people think of us. That is just about everything that leads us to make adrenaline, other than perhaps if a car drives out in front of us and we've suddenly got to slam our brakes on. Otherwise, those first 3 things I said, they're essentially our choice, they're in our control. So diving into what's leading us as individuals to produce those stress hormones, I think, is so critical to us improving our level of health and energy, and hormone balance obviously is a ripple effect of that.
Already you can begin to see that stress is not just being busy or having deadlines. It is more multifaceted and complex than first meets the eye. Dr. Robin Murphy is a naturopathic doctor with a strong focus on women's health. Let's see what she has to say about these issues.
Well, I think it's important to even just define stress because it's not just the typical stress that we think of psychological stress. There's also stress on the body related to circadian disruption and sleep deprivation. There's stress that we see from pathogens and infections, from toxicants and pollutants, even nutritional stress. So the composition of our food and nutrient status, even food restrictions, all can be considered sources of physiological stress. So there's acute stress, short term, is actually shown to improve the cellular response and defense processes and longevity, whereas prolonged stress, or what we would say as toxic stress, tends to overwhelm the compensatory response and shortens lifespan. And when we talk about stress and how it can impact hormones and hormone metabolism, we see how it impacts a number of different areas. So it can affect our sleep response and circadian rhythm. So that within itself will limit the body's ability to detoxify, to balance hormones. We see there's a huge impact on gut motility, elimination, as well as I mentioned, the microbiome. And the integrity of our digestive system has a huge impact on our liver and how well our liver is able to metabolize not only hormones and nutrient byproducts, as well as some of these toxicants that we come across that can influence hormone metabolism. We also see that there's a big impact on inflammation and oxidative stress within the body. And we know that inflammation in general, can impact how receptors and hormones bind together, our elimination pathways, as well as our immune system and how well we're able to kind of moderate our response to some of these particular triggers, such as infections, such as changes in our microbiome. And we know that long-term inflammation and changes with the immune system can eventually lead to autoimmunity as well. And then finally, metabolic changes. So things like insulin resistance has a huge impact on liver function, and we see a connection with fatty liver. And I see this a lot in women, perimenopausal women, where they'll start to notice perhaps some fat intolerance, right upper quadrant pain, where they're starting to show signs of bile insufficiency and fat intolerance. And this is really just a global symptom of poor liver metabolism, that the liver is unable to properly produce the bile that's necessary for fat absorption, that's important for fat-soluble vitamins, things like vitamin A, vitamin D, essential fatty acids. So it's this downstream effect that will have such an impact on not only hormone metabolism, but a number of different processes in the body.
Our mind and our body are so interconnected that we're finding more and more ways. So at first we thought there's these indirect connections between our gut and our brain. Now we're finding that no, there's actually direct connections. There's the vagus nerve, a very important nerve that goes straight from your brain, and it has many, many branches that go into our gut, where it gets feedback from our GI tract and then goes back up to the brain. Now we know that there's at least 4 more pathways that the brain communicates with the gut, and the gut communicates with the brain. And the gut is kind of the center of the hormonal and immune system. So we're getting constant communication there. And what we realize now is that not only does the food we eat send signals to our brain through these 4 or 5 different pathways we found, but that your thoughts can send signals to your body. And so I give the example again of the pandemic. We barely did anything all year and we didn't move a lot. However, we were more stressed and burnout than ever. And so it's not about just having more stuff to do, because we didn't have more stuff to do, yet our stress levels and our exposure to negative emotions really did a number on our health. So I think that understanding that, and then allowing yourself time every day, every week, every month to strengthen your mind-body connection, to learn how to connect your mind to the body. I had thought that mind-body connection was this vague term that didn't really mean anything in real life. Like, who has time to meditate for 60 minutes? I thought, like, who has time to really do all this like mind body stuff? But what I realized is that it's not optional, and you can do it in any way that you would like in very short form, and you can get there.
That was Dr. Amy Shah, an integrative medical doctor and author of the book I'm So Effing Tired, which I'm sure a lot of you will resonate with. I want to just talk to that last point that Dr. Shah made, which was the fact that so many of us think that we don't have the time to practice self-care, to look after ourselves so that we don't end up burnt out or unwell. As we dig deeper into this topic, you'll see that there are 2 types of stress that we experience: external stress and internal stress. External stress is the stuff we can't control, work pressures, deadlines, having to deal with a toddler all day. These are things that are happening to us that can impact us in various ways. Internal stress is where we place stress upon ourselves due to our internal thoughts, dialogue, and beliefs. We use this to colour our world and react to the external stresses in our own unique way. Dr. Libby Weaver explains how this could work.
I think we have to change. Things have evolved incredibly quickly recently, and I don't think our physiology, our biochemistry hasn't really been able to keep up with the rate of change. When you think that social media I think it's about 15 years old now, so that's just so new in the evolution of humans, given that we've been on the planet for somewhere between 150 and 300,000 years. It wasn't that long ago that we had to collect our own food. There's just so much that has changed, and it's changed so quickly. And as we've talked about, the pattern of stress hormone production has changed dramatically. So every generation, of course, has had stress, but never before has it been so constant and so relentless, because so much of it now for us is psychological. It's primarily the psychological stress that leads to the stress hormone production for us now, not threats to our life. And so because we've been living in this really intense way for, well, you could argue at least 30 years now, our body can't keep up with that. Our body can't handle that long term. We can do all sorts of things short term, but we can't do it long term. And we certainly don't want it to be multi-generational, because with that constant and relentless output of stress hormones, it's the disruption to the HPA axis, so the hypothalamus, that control region in the brain, telling the pituitary gland, and I call her the mother gland, and she's the mother gland because she speaks to all the other glands in the endocrine system that are making all the other hormones, like the ovaries and the thyroid and the adrenals. So when the hypothalamus asks the question, am I safe? When we've got all of this high circulating adrenaline zooming around in our blood, when it can see that there's all that adrenaline and it says, am I safe? The answer, of course, is no. So the hypothalamus then says to the pituitary, we're not safe. You need to tell your family of organs that we're not safe, and they then respond. So the thyroid produces things based on whether it's safe or not. The adrenals do, the ovaries do, and with the ovaries, that's what can suppress ovulation, which is obviously the main event in the menstrual cycle that leads to that beautiful progesterone production that helps everyone to feel fantastic. It kind of all has to come to a head, and whether that's collectively or in our own individual lives, or obviously our individual lives all contribute to that collective enormous challenge that's sort of bubbling up right now. And we have to start to, I think, learn new tools and start to understand how we think. We have two thought systems inside of us in our brain. So we have what I just refer to as the old brain, which is on automatic pilot. It's the part of our brain that's been with us in an evolutionary sense for a very long time. It's the part of us that keeps us safe, but it makes decisions in a heartbeat. And then we have what I simply refer to as the new brain, which is a second thought system, which from an evolutionary perspective has become part of us much later down the track. And it has the ability to reason, it can apply logic. But right now, at this point in evolution, it's much slower than our old brain, and it's also optional. So I'll give you an example of this in action and of a way we can start to address how we think. So let's say you're in the supermarket and Mrs. Smith is walking towards you, and you know Mrs. Smith. You don't know her that well, but you know her enough to say hello to. And as you get closer to her, what you perceive is that Mrs. Smith puts her head down and she marches straight past you and she doesn't speak to you. So in that moment, your old brain instantaneously makes a decision about what it means for Mrs. Smith to not have just spoken to you. And all of it's unconscious. So the old brain will usually create some kind of meaning that Mrs. Smith doesn't like us. So if you could hear the dialogue of it, which we can't because it's unconscious and it's really rapid, but if we could hear the dialogue of it, I think it'd be along the lines of, oh my goodness, Mrs. Smith doesn't like me. I've let Mrs. Smith down. I've disappointed her in some way. She thinks I'm a dreadful person. Oh, our kids are at school together. Maybe they had a fight and she thinks I'm the world's worst parent. So some form of Mrs. Smith didn't speak to me because she thinks I'm a dreadful person. So in that moment, when the old brain does that, we're not aware of it. All we know is that when we went to the supermarket, we felt fine, not amazing, not dreadful, just fine. And now when we're heading home, we feel like there's something not right, but we can't identify what that is. We just now know that we can't wait to eat some of the groceries we just bought, or we can't wait to open a bottle of wine and it's way too early in the day for that, or whatever the way people cope with emotional pain is, they will sometimes get fixated on, now I really want that, when before you went to the supermarket, you didn't want that. What we need to remind ourselves of is, in that moment in the supermarket where Mrs. Smith didn't speak to us, is we have the option to bring our new brain in and question what just happened and go, okay, so I haven't seen Mrs. Smith for 3 weeks, so it's very unlikely that I've upset her, but on the off chance that I have, perhaps I could bake her a cake and go around and see Mrs. Smith and check in with her and find out if she's okay. And then on the off chance that I have upset her, we can talk it through. But what we'll probably find is that Mrs. Smith has a lot on her mind, or maybe that day at the supermarket she hadn't had a shower, or she had a big pimple on her face and she was really hoping that she wasn't going to run into anyone. Because what we do endlessly, the way little children do, is we make everything about us. We behave in an incredibly egocentric way quite often as adults, and we're not supposed to. I truly believe that by adulthood, we're supposed to have evolved out of the egocentric ways of our childhood. Children are supposed to be egocentric. And what I mean by that is we think the world revolves around us. We think that if someone's happy, it's because of us. And we think that if they're sad, it's because of us. And unfortunately, we're not given the tools as adults to remember that people behave the way they behave as a reflection of their life experience, as a reflection of their joy, their pain, their beliefs, their values. That's what's on display when you interact or don't interact with someone. I think one of the reasons that so many people are feeling the intensity of stress is because we've got to almost feel the pain of it to go, there has to be another way. There's got to be another way to live. And part of that is examining how I think, seeing the beliefs that I made up as a young person to try to make sense of the environment I was in, about whether I'm enough or not, or whether I'm worthy of being loved, or whatever it is. It's time I examine these beliefs that I absorbed as a child so that I can shift away from needing the approval of others, because whenever we need the approval of others, it's nearly always going to bring stress, because we're not necessarily always going to know what other people are thinking. We're not going to know what they think of us, and not everyone is going to like us, and that's okay.
If you're curious about your hormonal health, take our quiz. You'll get a report with insights into some key areas you need to look at when it comes to getting your hormones in alignment, as well as some handy tips to get you started. Go to theshiftclinic.com/links.
I love this question because it's really not that hard, but we overcomplicate it as if it's the hardest thing that you're going to face today. When I asked you, first of all, hey, are you stressed? And you're right. The answer is usually, oh, I cope okay. It's like, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, can you identify you're stressed? And also, how is that relative to your day and how your day plays out? So I think that the first thing that we can actually do is recognize or acknowledge that we are. And for people that say they aren't, I'm sorry. It's impossible not to be. The collective energy of the world is stress. So how you think you can tap out of that? We're living just a really fast-paced lifestyle. And yeah, sure, you can choose to tap out, and some of us cope better than others. But the reality is that our thresholds are definitely heightened. And I see this often even in younger women, them getting their adrenals are being activated earlier, and they're getting their periods earlier and earlier as a result. So the consequences are, they're long term, I think. But for patients, if I can say to them, okay, I want you to think about when you feel like you're overwhelmed. And I think the other problem with stress is it's the word. We've associated, like I said, with a whole lot of pressure and running late or feeling under the pump. But can you identify when you're feeling overwhelmed? And then when you're feeling overwhelmed, can you actually sit down for me and write down what your current stresses are? What is making you feel overwhelmed? Because the reality with stress is it becomes a really bad habit. We choose it to get a job done. And we also, many of us love to feel the pressure to get the job done. And all of a sudden, it's a coping mechanism and a means of an outcome.
That was Doctor of Chinese Medicine Nat Kringoudis. What I want to explore now is the over-glorification of stress and bring light to the fact that if you are indeed chronically stressed, then perhaps you have put yourself in this position. We can keep ourselves stressed and busy for a number of reasons, so let's look into this a little further. Dr. Vincent Pedre is a medical doctor that discovered for himself the detrimental impacts of stress and how to overcome them. You can hear about his story in his episode of the Expert series from Season 1. I asked him if he thought that stress was being over-glorified.
I think there is this desire to achieve, to work harder, and certainly the technological age has not reduced stress, but in many ways added to our stress, because now you can take work home and you can work at nighttime, you can work on your smartphone. There's no escaping it. And I think at some point together as a human race, we have to figure out what our true priorities are. Like, do you want to be stressed your entire life, work yourself to death, and then not even enjoy your retirement? Or do you want to look at living life from a different paradigm? I do believe the new generations are kind of thinking that way now. And you wonder if we're going to have a worldwide shift in that. We certainly need to redefine our relationship to stress. And from my travels around the world to countries that are not necessarily third world, but countries like Cuba, like Peru, like Tanzania, Africa. And what I find is people are happy and they're living simpler lives. They're maybe not as well off as they might be in the US, working harder, but they have balance.
Well, I think that we've been given 2 jobs, 3 jobs, 4 jobs, because before in ancient societies, or, if you even look at 100 years ago, there may have been a list of responsibilities that a woman might have had, but it was very clearly demarcated. There was roles that the women took care of, and there's roles that men took care of, traditional roles. And then as women started to get more into the workplace, they started to take on more responsibilities at work. However, they still kept their responsibilities outside of work. And what we realize now when we look at the recent studies is that women are doing more and more and more. And it's no wonder that they feel this way. So I'll give you an example of myself. I'm a physician. I'm a mother. I have written a recent book. And so I've been on book tour, like virtual book tour actually this year. So that's been better. And I am a clinician. Like, I go to work to see patients. I just rushed back from that before starting to start our conversation today. And so this is what I mean. Like, I'm still going to spend time with my children. I still have to worry about, food, lunches, activities. I have to plan my patients' plans. I have to work on my book launch strategy. I have to do podcasts and interviews. So it's not surprising to me that women are in a state that needs to be fixed. And so what I invite women to do is what I had to tell myself when I was in that place is that I never want to get into the place where I feel broken and that I am more than one day away from recovery. So what I did is I built in things to my daily life to ensure that I would never need a emergency vacation, or I wouldn't be forced into a situation where I felt outside of my own body. Like I said, it's a terrible place to be.
That was integrative Dr. Amy Shah again. As women, we certainly have a lot on our plates, and I have to ask the question, are we choosing this for ourselves? It would seem that life for women has changed very swiftly, and every decade seems to add more to our plates. Rushing woman syndrome was a term coined by Dr. Libby Weaver when she wrote her book of the same name. This term resonated with so many women, so I wanted to ask Dr. Libby about it.
Most of my clients have been women, and they would generally turn up to appointments, and if they were late, they weren't stressed, maybe a little bit, but not like later in the 2000s. And the behaviour was different, and the health patterns were different. The health pictures were different. And then around 2009 and 10, I noticed a dramatic shift in women's behaviour, in the way that they'd turn up for appointments. They were trying to jam pack so much in before they got to an appointment. And then if they couldn't find a park, it felt like the end of the world that they couldn't find a park. And so stress, in my observation, really escalated and became more intense around that time. And because of that constant, relentless stress hormone production, obviously that has a ripple effect onto reproductive system hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, thyroid function, all those things. So I know people don't turn up to have an appointment with you because they feel fantastic. They come because they're wanting to work on things and things aren't right. But I just noticed an enormous escalation in the severity of the symptoms I was seeing, and it was just the same patterns over and over again with relentless stress in the background and a relentless, I guess, wanting to make everybody happy, a sense of responsibility on their shoulders of, I'm the caretaker of the whole world, not just my immediate family. I've got to make sure aging parents are okay. I've got to make sure my friends are okay. And there's such immense beauty in all of that caring. It's beyond belief. The world would fall apart if women stopped caring. We would lose the magnificent sense of community that caring and kindness creates. The challenge is that when we meet the needs of others constantly, it can start to take away from us taking care of ourselves. When I wrote that book, I actually got curious about women who were very community-minded. They were incredibly focused on service and contribution, but their health was fantastic. And then there was also a group of women who were very focused on service, which I came to really call servitude, because their health was suffering. And one of the big distinctions I made, and it sounds so simple now, and we do talk about it a lot now, is the ability to say no. But it's not the actual saying no, it's what's behind that. Because there were women who were of incredible service, making immense contribution to the community, to their families in a wider scale, and yet when they had great health and energy. And one of the things that came through when I would talk to those women is they were able to still create a boundary. They still could say no when they needed to. And then there were the others who couldn't, and their health was suffering. And let's say you're drowning in tasks of your own, there's just no space in your life, and someone comes up to you and says, can you help me with this? And every bone in your body is screaming no, but what you find comes out of your mouth is, yes, sure, I'll help you. And then later you think, oh, why on earth did I agree to that? In that moment, essentially what we're worried about is what the person on the receiving end of our no is going to think of us. And I've come to call this concept forward words. A really useful exercise to do for people is to take pen and paper and ask yourself, how do I need other people to see me? And these are what I call your forward words. Like you walk around with these words on your forehead, wishing everyone could see them, sort of thing. So what are your forward words? How do I need other people to see me? Really common responses are, I need people to see me as kind, thoughtful, selfless. It might be intelligent, hilarious, entertaining, independent. Whatever it is, there's no right or wrong, but find your forward words. How do you need other people to see you? And then the next time you're stressed, pause and consider, am I perceiving someone is seeing me in the opposite way to one of my forward words? Because most of the time the answer will be yes. And for the people who can't say no, they are way more concerned about how the person who'd be on the receiving end of their no would think of them, because they might see them as opposite to one of their forward words. They might think they're unkind or thoughtless or really selfish if they don't say yes. But when you flip it around and you think, oh, if I went to someone and said, could you help me with this? And they said, oh, look, no, I'm sorry, I can't. I'd love to, but I'm drowning in my own tasks at the moment. What are you going to think of that person? Oh, well, that's it. You know, we're not friends anymore. See you later. We're not going to do that. Usually you say to someone in that situation, oh, well, I hope you're okay. Is there anything I can do to help alleviate that drowning feeling you've got? But we sort of don't afford that level of kindness to ourselves. So we say yes when we really want to say no, back to the old story I've been talking about because we're worried about what others think of us. So that was a big insight for me that came when I was writing Rushing Woman Syndrome, making a distinction between the caring, the kindness, the community that service and contribution make and that is so needed in the world. However, we must be able to say no when we need to go to bed earlier, when we need a weekend where we're not doing a lot, when we need an hour to read a book or whatever it is that nourishes your soul, that reinvigorates you, that allows you to rest. we need to be comfortable with that and all of the gifts and restoration that brings us.
The conversation continues in our Shift community group. Join the group by heading to theshiftclinic.com/links. I wanted now to ask you the question, do you have trouble saying no? Having healthy boundaries are something that we talk to our clients at Shift about a lot. A boundary is what is okay and what is not okay. And for many of us, we say yes to so many things that cross our boundaries simply because we want to please someone or have them see us in a certain way. Or perhaps it's just that we've always been this way and need to consciously create boundaries for ourselves to preserve our energy and our health. This is one of the topics we talk about in our wellness challenges. You can register for the next one at theshiftclinic.com. Physiologically speaking, when you're under these stresses, your body makes cortisol and adrenaline. In the short term, these hormones are great, helping you to focus and move through the stress. But since we're exposed to long-term chronic stress, there are many health complications that arise as a result. The HPA axis stands for your hypothalamic pituitary axis, and it is the feedback loop that is responsible for helping you to cope with stress day to day. Dr. Libby explains more about how this can then go on to impact your hormones.
So when the hypothalamus says, am I safe? And we've got all that adrenaline zooming around in our blood, the hypothalamus doesn't know it's there because we've had 2 coffees this morning and we've got 600 unopened emails and we're running late for a meeting. It just sees all the adrenaline and says to the pituitary, no, we're not safe. So one of the first things the pituitary then does is she starts to try to work out whether it would be safe to have a baby, because one of the agendas, particularly of estrogen, is to try to get you to conceive every single month of your life, whether that's what you want or not. But obviously to bring a baby into a world, the body's got to make sure that it's safe on a physical level and that there's food available. And so when you've got high circulating levels of adrenaline, it says to your body that you're not safe, because that's what it's always meant. And then the other stress hormone, cortisol, we only ever made that in long-term stress and chronic stress, and the only long-term stress we've had as a species up until the very, very, very recent past was when food was scarce, floods, famines, wars. So the body hasn't yet learnt to discern between the cortisol we make when there's no food left in the world and the cortisol we make when we're worried about our bank balance, for example. It's all the same to the body. So when the hypothalamus says, am I safe, and gets the answer no, and says that to the pituitary, she has the option of suppressing the signals that have to be sent to the ovaries for ovulation. And when we ovulate at mid-cycle, that's when once we've ovulated, the crater out of which the egg comes, that's where we make our lovely big surge of progesterone. And progesterone is supposed to be the dominant sex hormone in what's called the luteal phase. It's not a proper half, but often the language we use is the second half, or it's the second stage of the cycle. It's after ovulation. That's when progesterone is supposed to be at its highest. And it is a very powerful anti-anxiety agent. It's an antidepressant and it's a diuretic and allows us to get rid of fluid. So one of the big physiological shifts that come from this relentless stress hormone production is huge increases in anxious feelings, a tendency to a low mood, and we retain fluid, so we feel puffy and swollen. And when we feel like that, it impacts absolutely everything, because particularly if you can look at your life and think, I really need to feel grateful for this extraordinary life I have, but I don't feel grateful. You can add guilt to this mixture that I'm talking about as well. But when you've got a lot of anxious feelings that you can't really explain why they're there, and you have a tendency to a low mood and you feel puffy and swollen and your pants are really tight around the middle, even though you feel like you're making a good effort with eating nourishing food, it messes with your headspace. And when we feel like that, I think it impacts everything. It impacts what we cook for dinner, or if we can't, the energy we would have to cook dinner, or if we think, can't do that tonight, I'll just get takeaway. It impacts whether we get off the couch and go for a walk or not. It'll impact jobs we might apply for, friends that we make, our self-talk, and the way we speak to everyone in the world, including the people we love the most. Because you think about what happens when we've got a lot of anxious feelings and our mood is really low and you feel puffy and swollen, you're so incredibly uncomfortable in your body and your mind. The ripple effect of that on ourselves, but also on everyone we interact with, can be massive. So that is one of the biggest consequences I see happening from the way that we're living, from this constant, relentless stress hormone output. And what concerns me is that I think not enough people realise the physiological effects of that shift away from good progesterone production. Because when we have a lot of anxious feelings, it's natural for our brain to try to work out why. And we go, well, I must be anxious because of that or that or that. And then we pin it on that. Those things might need addressing, or they might be concerning, but they might not really be why you have all these anxious feelings. You can literally, your heart can pound to the point that it disrupts your sleep when you don't have enough progesterone. And it can be very frightening, it can be very uncomfortable, but it can be, and the symptoms don't have to be that severe. But I think that one of the big effects of the relentless output of stress hormones is inadequate progesterone production and all of the consequences of that.
If you've listened to the series so far, you'll begin to see that there's another layer to what we discussed in the previous episodes when we were talking about things that impact a healthy menstrual cycle. Managing stress is not just about keeping your cool. It's about keeping your whole body healthy, including your hormones and gut function, as gastroenterologist Dr. Marvin Singh explains here.
We all talk about this mind-gut connection and how I think I talked in the first season of Shift about this vagus nerve acting as a information superhighway where information is just continuously going back and forth. And this is really the core of this gut-brain axis. And we know that our brain can impact our microbiome and the microbiome can impact the brain. And when you're under stress, stress was given to us as a feeling for a reason, because if something bad is happening, we want to be able to react to that and get out of that situation so that, we protect ourselves so we don't die. It's a protective mechanism. But these days in the modern times, our problem really is not so much like there's a tiger running towards me, I need to get out of this jungle. It's more like chronic stress, about life, about your job, about your family, about whatever, And it's that chronic stress where your body is feeling these signals of the lion or the tiger in the jungle chasing you every day for most of the day or all of the day. And there is no lion or tiger chasing you in the jungle. So the body is the same. The human being with all the organs and how everything is set up inside is the same. Yet our modern lives are different. And so that's where a lot of the problems occur and things get really messed up. The messaging is impacted by that. And the microbiome plays a role in this because when you're under stress, the composition of the microbiome shifts. And the composition of the microbiome shifts. That also means the metabolites that are produced may be changed. I want everybody, I guess, from this conversation to really think about metabolites when we're talking about gut and gut functions, because that's really the action part of the microbiome. It's the doer of the microbiome is these metabolites. There's a lot of studies talking about how the microbiome can impact the development of this hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which can affect your behavior. This is this HPA axis that we talk about. And the HPA axis can control our reactions to stress and regulate our digestion, immunity, mood, energy, a lot of other different factors. And so this happens through metabolites, and metabolites come from the microbiome. And the microbiome can shift as a result of what's going on in your environment.
This topic is massive, and as you can see, there are so many factors to consider when we think about stress. We're going to dig deeper in part 2 of this episode, where we will also look at some of the practical things that you can do to manage your stress.
Coming up on The Shift.
We know as a society that this needs to shift.
And you want to be on a mission for the truth.
What a lot of us kind of collectively want right now is to feel better in the process while we're getting better.
Mindfulness is one of my favorite strategies.
Is there a way to apply sound as a technology for the treatment of things like depression?
Even just 5 minutes of time outdoors can have health benefits, help our mental health.
series is a production of the Shift Clinic. Hosted by Katherine Maslen. Music and sound design by Shade Furlong. Thank you to all of our experts. For more details on them, go to theshiftclinic.com.
We can be. We must be.
The first generation to end extreme poverty.
The generation most determined to fight injustice
and inequality.
The generation that saves the planet
from climate change.
And this is how we will get it done.
The global goals.
A 15-year plan for everyone, everywhere.
With no one left behind.
The global goals are a framework that collectively help us
support the health of our people
and the planet.
At Shift, we are ambassadors for the global goals.
This project supports global goal number 6.
Clean water and sanitation.
Every time you listen
to an episode of The Shift,
we provide a day's access to clean water
for a human in need
in Malawi, Africa.
Water is the foundation to health, and we believe
every human should have access
to clean, healthy water.
So please share this podcast wide
and keep tuning in
so we can impact those who need it the most.